So that's the wave that I did in this painting. You might have remembered I was working on it and I hadn't finished it. And
I saw it last night. It
James's
didn't look
dinner.
realistic. Now it does with all the spray there. Oh.
And it's this old-fashioned cake donut mix. And I'll be talking about that and Stormlapse against these other ones. I still hadn't returned Homicide Hill, so I wanted to show that I preferred it to McEnroe. I'm not a tennis fan.
Yeah.
I watched some tennis with James when he was at my house, and it was on because he liked tennis.
Reasonably.
And
it's not my favorite sport thing.
So it was something that he could share with his brother.
Yeah, my brother's an oldest brother, and they find out on average oldest brothers tend to prefer individual sports. I tend to prefer team sports. They find out that younger brothers tend to prefer team sports. Youngest brothers tend to prefer team sports. But they find that oldest brothers are the second most violent in a family, and youngest brothers are the most violent. So youngest brothers might like team sports more for the, things like football, not English football, but American football, for the violence, or hockey for the violence. I like watching hockey, but I don't like the violence at all.
This older sibling, I don't like any sports.
Yeah, the study wasn't very good for women.
I like painting.
And the guy admitted it, that he didn't have enough data.
Yeah.
So,
no, I like hiking.
The one thing he pointed out was that, I better not say that, but he did do a little bit of stuff, and one of the preliminary findings he found for women looked to be very interesting. So, but I'm not going to.
You may as well say it.
No. I'm not going to say it at all. Okay. I'll tell you why later. Okay. And you'll agree with me.
All right. So, when I was given this old-fashioned cake donut mix from the Salvation Army, I said to the woman, like she was saying, they call for an awful lot of fat, oil in the recipe for you to add in. And I was like, it won't matter, because everything that I get that's like that sort of mix, it turns into waffle. So it doesn't really matter.
So you wouldn't be interested in making a donut. Donuts
so I don't follow the recipe
oily, right?
of that. Yeah, I told her the only oil that's going to be included in this is going to be whatever I grease the waffle iron with. Yeah. So as it turns out, I did have one of these waffles. So this makes, I think it said 30 donuts.
Wow.
Somewhere I think it said, no, 18. I exaggerated. But it sure doesn't make that many waffles. So it made 5 Belgian waffles. And that one didn't turn out, it's the darkest one. So it won't taste as good. So I put that on top so you can eat that one first, because the other ones turned out perfect. So you'll see. Yeah. It won't taste as good. The sugar will taste a little bit too burnt or whatever. What do you think?
It tastes kind of fun.
Okay. But had I put that on the bottom and you got to that last, you might have been like, oh, this isn't so good. But
that's possible.
Anyway, so that's what I do. I don't follow the instructions. I mix it with water, and in the case of this one, I thought, okay, well, how much water should I put in? I dumped some in and I went, oh, that's too much. And then I just put in ground almonds to soak up some of that water. And let it sit for a couple minutes, and yeah, it worked out. And so I used the ladle, put some in the grill and the waffle iron, and it worked out perfectly. So yeah, I really like getting, I mean, this isn't something that I would buy, but having eaten one of these waffles, this is the best waffle I've ever had in my life, was the donut waffle. But I still wouldn't buy it. But I love when I'm given these mixes, even though I wouldn't buy these things, because I don't know, James and I have we've decided, okay, well, if we're given something, then we can eat it, you know, even if it's something that's not something that we should really eat, you know. We do anyway, because we just feel like, oh, well, I'm thankful that I'm given this thing and whatever.
No, we don't make that happen. It's just a treat.
It's a treat.
It's not part of the regular diet.
No, exactly. So, I'm going to talk about this gouache next. This is just a tiny little set, just teeny little tubes in there.
5, 6?
Yep, 5 little tubes. And one of them has a skeleton, skull and crossbones symbol on it.
Oh,
so I don't think I'll be using that black one. But I don't, as I've said in the past, I really don't use black, and hardly ever. So this doesn't have any instructions on it. And when I was watching this, this is a lesson from Watercolour Secrets from the water disc, and you can see it's a wave, it's water. And this is another lesson from the water disc, and I had put this away for, I think I dated it. I decided, okay, it's done. I don't have gouache, so I'm just going to call it done without doing that step. And I dated it, I think, January 13th. And then, because I didn't finish it, I had this sort of tension that I didn't finish it, I'm a failure, whatever. And I was having a hard time progressing through the series after that. It was just hanging over me that this thing really isn't finished, right? And so finally I decided, okay, yesterday I went out and I bought that, was it yesterday? Yeah, I think so. Went and bought that gouache. And I had hummed and hawed over it because I went and looked at the price at Michael's and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't possibly do that. So I printed off a 40% off coupon, and yesterday I went and bought it, and it costs $23 and some odd cents for 5 tiny little tubes.
That's with the coupon.
With the coupon. And I was like, wow, you know, I just got the basic introductory level gouache set, which is these little tubes. They're much bigger ones. I think there was a set that had a bunch of colors, $174 and something. But anyway, so with this art project thing, winter I've been doing, I was thinking, well, I have a lot of art supplies, I'll just use them up, right? And so going out and having to buy new art supplies kind of went against that whole idea. And plus I'm thinking, well, we go get food from the food truck and Salvation Army, and I'm very frugal about buying food and stuff, and then to go out and buy this, it just seemed silly. But you know, once I started using it, I was so glad that I got it. And it's funny that way. Like, I told James yesterday and that I got it, and he was like, that's an investment. That's not a luxury item. You don't have to feel bad about that. And I was thinking, an investment, you know, like, I haven't made a cent off of my art. So anyway, and I was thinking, well, what made me decide to get it is I have never used gouache before in my life, and I thought this whole thing, it's a learning process, and I would be learning how this works. And so, like, I read that it was acrylic, and I thought, well, couldn't I just use acrylic paint then instead of, but you know, once I tried this, no, it goes on differently than regular acrylic paint. I couldn't have used acrylic paint for this, and I don't know what, it must be really heavily pigmented, because when I first started, now I should have started over here where it's really thick, there's a lot of agitation of the water, and so the frothiness is really thick here, right? I should have started there because I didn't know how, like, he used a rigger, and I do have a rigger in my set that I don't have very good control over. So I use this little guy. So I don't know what this is, but number 3 something. So anyway, I really love this paintbrush. So when I want to do detail, I've always went for this one. I love it.
Is it you that's put on most of the paint here, or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all me.
Yeah, it's hard to read what's on it.
Yeah. So because I clean the brush part, but I don't really care that much about the stick part. So anyway, I should have started here where it's thick, because I didn't know how to use the stuff, frankly. There's no instruction on how to use it, and when he was putting it on, he's like, okay, well, put a little bit of yellow into this part and a little bit of blue into the stuff you're putting here and this and that, but he didn't explain that you should mix some water in it. It doesn't come straight out of the tube, so you don't use it like acrylics that way. Or at least I was finding you didn't. Because if you go back to the beginning when I show this picture, you can see some of my lines are really, really thin. That's because I figured out how to use it along the line, that I needed to thin it down with water. At first, these really thick lines over here, these are supposed to be thin. They're not supposed to be thick. It's supposed to be thick over there where there's lots of, the water's really winding up over here, right? But here it's not supposed to be that thick. But I didn't realize I should have thinned it down, the gouache, before I tried to put it on. But then once I got down here, it was working really nicely for me. I was very, very happy with having bought this product and having had the courage to actually follow the lesson straight through from the beginning to the end. And I know that next time I do a wave, it's going to be perfect. I know where I went wrong in this, and I know how it will go right. So I feel very glad about this whole thing. Now I will talk about my bamboo skewer. You're probably wondering why I brought this out. Well, with this painting, you might be thinking, well, there's a lot, this white bit, why didn't you just use, you had masking fluid, why didn't you just use it there? Well, that would have been a lot of masking fluid and it wouldn't have worked out. I know how masking fluid works and it wouldn't have worked for there. I did use the masking fluid on these little infinity clouds and the ocean sounds words. I used a lot of masking fluid to make those ocean sounds words so that I could just run over the sky and the water and get really smooth paint there, and it worked out really nicely. I did get a smooth sky and there's no watermarks there or in the water. So that worked out really well. But how I get thin lines is with the bamboo skewer. So I've never heard anybody, I've watched a few art instruction things for watercolors, and I haven't had anybody talk about using a bamboo skewer or a toothpick or something like that. These things, they're totally disposable and they work out really well for this. I've heard people talk, just about everybody who's talked about masking fluid says you can use an old paintbrush. No, don't ever do that. If your paintbrush is old enough that you would want to waste it on masking fluid, it won't work well for masking fluid. It'll have bristles popping out all over the place and it's not going to go on like this tip will. And
so you discovered this method then?
Yeah, because at first I did try using an old paintbrush, and boy was I ever regretting that, because I could have used the paintbrush I use old paintbrushes for all sorts of things. I have one old paintbrush that the bristles I mustn't have cleaned it very well at one point, and the bristles are really hard, and that works out really well for when I want to scrape off, if I've made a mistake with the watercolor paint and I want to scrape some of it off. It works perfectly for that. That paintbrush, it's useless for everything else. And then there's the paintbrushes, like some people will use a palette knife for mixing their colors. I just use my old paintbrushes, that are junk, and it works out pretty well. So, bamboo skewer, that's the best thing for masking fluid. It's awesome. So, there's my picture done. And
it's very satisfying.
Very satisfying, yeah. I'm very happy with my use of gouache for the first time. I'm thrilled.
Good investment.
Yeah.
Even if it hadn't worked out.
Yeah.
Many investments don't work out. You try to make an educated guess as to what sort of investment you make.
Oh, I was going to say one more thing. Now, looking at this painting after the fact and having smelled the gouache while I was working with it, I'm like, it has a very stinky kind of, well, not very, but you can smell it. And I was thinking about the way it was going on. If you had a really fine paintbrush like this and you used whiteout, I bet you could get the same effects. Honestly, I think you could. And I'm going to try it sometime. But it didn't occur to me beforehand. Now, you wouldn't be able to mix like the bluish white and the yellowish white. It would just all be white, I think. I don't know how you could, because I don't even know what whiteout's made out of. But it'd certainly be a lot cheaper than going out and spending a bunch of money on a gouache set.
Yeah, it's funny how there's supposed to be starving artists around.
Yeah.
Yeah, they charge an arm and a leg for.
That's why artists
materials.
are starving, because they're paying a fortune for artist supplies.
It could be.
Yeah.
Some just aren't very
Nuts.
motivated when it comes to supporting themselves.
Maybe so.
And I know more than one.
So, Stormlapse got the top of the stack, because who doesn't like watching time-lapse skies? And this is time-lapse storm skies. So it's really awesome. Everybody would like this, I think. I did. Homicide Hill Season 3, I already reviewed this. I didn't like it as much as Season 1, like I said before, but there were still a lot of funny things, still worth watching. Like I think it was the second to last one, I think it was second last, the Christmas episode. It was funny, you know, the end of the episode, there's like a freeze frame where the credits are rolling by and there's people just frozen. And the one criminal you see him running away. So everyone else is frozen, everything's frozen, but he runs away, right? That's funny. And it's just a little moment that maybe people wouldn't even notice at the end. They would have already turned the TV off or got up to get something or change the channel to their next show or whatever, right? But it's great. And the last episode, I loved it. It was longer than the other ones, I believe. At least it seemed longer, but yeah, German with English subtitles. And honestly, there were quite a few mistakes with the English subtitles. I don't know who was working on those.
They seem to pronounce their German pretty well, because I could make out some of the stuff that they were saying.
Well, it's in German. They should be able to pronounce their language well.
Sometimes when you listen to French stuff, you might know a fair amount of French, but they're just slurring everything. It all depends.
Okay. Well, German, it seems very exact anyway. I don't think
they
it's a
don't
different
drop
culture.
off a lot of. They don't drop off a lot of sounds. They'll say all the sounds, even if it's spitting over the interlocutor. You know, spits, clash, clash.
All right. So this was put out in 2022, and this McEnroe thing. And if you're a really big fan of tennis, like if James watched this, I bet he'd be like, "Oh, that was great." But he didn't watch it. I was stuck watching it because it's due tomorrow.
I would have been in mourning, kind of like, because this is the guy who unseated and really upset my favorite player, probably of all time, Bjorn Borg.
Yeah, and wow, he's still handsome.
Bjorn Borg?
Yeah. They showed, they showed both of them, McEnroe and him, as old men. Now, I mean, they're about your age.
McEnroe is younger.
Okay, yeah.
And he's losing a bit of his hair there right now.
Well, he still looks pretty good.
Well, looks pretty good.
I mean, Bjorn Borg, wow, incredible. He could have been a model. So, and I mean, whereas McEnroe, he's throwing tantrums all the time and whatever.
Oh yeah.
And Bjorn Borg, he was just totally sedate, you know. No, he could have played poker.
Well, I'm telling you, the story goes that Bjorn Borg had a really bad temper when he was very beginning.
Huh.
And I think the story goes his dad or something like that took his racket away from him. Something like that.
Wow.
Some sort of discipline. So he learned discipline. And yeah, I couldn't stand that.
I think I remember watching a show about that before or something. Not that I wanted to.
So when McEnroe came along, I wasn't thoroughly disgusted because the guy in modern times, which is my times, which isn't that modern anymore, who seemed to pioneer that role of a guy, a nasty role. He almost had a name for him, Ili Nastasi or something like that, maybe Romanian. He was the bad boy of tennis for a while, but he was nothing by comparison with a guy called Jimmy Connors, who preceded Bjorn Borg and continued to play after Bjorn Borg. Bjorn Borg couldn't take being beaten by.
Yeah, I mean, they don't say that
quit.
outright. Like Bjorn Borg was saying, well, he told McEnroe, one day you'll learn that there's more important things in life than tennis, or something like that. But I mean, when they showed Bjorn Borg being interviewed by somebody, then the interviewer was asking him, well, what are you going to fill your time with? And there was just dead silence, right? Like, he hadn't planned to...
You read it correctly.
Yeah, he was
just store the guts and heart out of it.
He knew he couldn't win against McEnroe.
That's at Wimbledon. But you see, Wimbledon's the kind of surface, it's grass, so the bounces aren't predictable. So McEnroe had this impatient American kind of style, which is serve and volley. You serve and you rush into the net and you try to finish the point.
Yeah, he was a net player, they were saying. Yeah.
You try to finish the point as soon as possible. And that favors someone who doesn't do ground strokes, which is hitting back regularly again and again and again. That's French Open style, place court.
Okay.
And Bjorn Borg won 6 French Open titles in a row.
Okay.
Then, well, that's probably been broken by that idiot steroid monster Nadal. But that was, I think, the record until then. And he'd won 5 Wimbledons in a row, including the one before when he got beaten by McEnroe, where he beat McEnroe.
Mm-hmm.
And he should have kept on going. McEnroe couldn't have beaten him on clay court. He could have won maybe several more French Opens. And we're like, Bjorn Borg was stoic, but you could tell that things bothered him. He didn't like artificial courts. So he just didn't play the US Open. Well, when US Open's fast, fast surface and all that sort of stuff, but when he was winning all those Wimbledons in a row, he would have won 5 US Opens in a row probably. And that would have become close. I think it would have set the record for most what are called Grand Slams. There are 4 of them, including the Australian Open. And it would have made him the best player all time. I am telling you right now, when you take his foibles into account and all that sort of stuff, he's not the best player of all time. He let things like that, McEnroe beating him, and so on and so forth, and his not liking the artificial surface get to his head. But I am telling you, with the possible exception of Rod Laver, who won the Grand Slams twice. In other words, one season he won all 4 of them, and then another season he won all 4 of them. With the possible exception of Rod Laver, the most brilliant player ever. So there's a difference. Bobby Orr might be, I'm not sure about this, but he might be the most brilliant hockey player ever. Not the greatest. Wayne Gretzky was that. Wayne Gretzky, from what I can tell of any organized sports, the greatest player ever. Soccer, you name it. His statistical dominance over a long period, not over 10 years like with Bobby Orr. Like he set this record and that record. Yeah, who cares? Because he wasn't able to sustain it. He was through by age 30. And it's kind of like Bjorn Borg. I don't know if he made it past age 30 because of his inability to take.
You have 5 minutes if you still want to talk about
crushed off his throne and stuff like that. So Jimmy Connors, who was kind of being shut out by Bjorn Borg, continued his career. He's young. He's older than Bjorn Borg, but he continued for 5 years or so after Bjorn Borg. Bjorn Borg could have gone on for 7 more years. There are a lot of people who have this attitude that, Once you're not top of the mountain, you should retire. Well, I don't believe that. If I'd had that attitude, I'd be dead now. Because I lost so much to bone marrow cancer, 5 fractured vertebrae. You know, like I used to be something like an athlete. I played university soccer and I competed in university track. 2 separate sports. I can't even run now. And when I say run, jog, I can't jog now. But there are things to live for. And you know, like if you're still competitive, if you've been up at the top of the peak, you should continue. I don't necessarily endorse what Gordie Howe did. He came out of retirement, as I recall, so he could play at age 50, something like that. He played in I don't know how many decades, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and probably by doing that, coming out of the retirement, he probably made it into, he could have made it into the 90s. I'm not sure how that would work out. He'd be about 20 in 1950, and you add 30 years to the 30 years. Well, definitely played into the 80s. I'm not sure if he made it into the 90s. Anyway, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. 5 decades he played in. It was the late 40s when he started. And, you know, like he was considered, when I was a kid, my favorite player back then was Bobby Howe. Gordie Howe was considered the greatest ever. He was, I suppose, greater than Bobby Howe by a considerable margin. I mean, he had a lot of longevity, mainly because he had lots of room. He had very sharp elbows, and he didn't mind using it, and even tougher fists. So if you gave him any trouble, he didn't need someone, an enforcer. He was his own enforcer. So he got lots of room out there on the ice, and he profited from it. He still was a scoring marvel in the late 30s. So I believe in playing until it's obvious that you can't continue, or you can make a contribution of some sort or another. In tennis, it's just an individual sport, and it's hard to make a contribution. I'm reminded of Brian Trottier, pride of Val Marie. I've been to Val Marie along with Polly. I experienced the closest thing to a tornado that we've ever experienced coming out of the Grasslands Provincial Park through Val Marie. Anyway, you know, like Brian Trottier won 4 Stanley Cups in a row with the New York Islanders. He was one of the few of the Islanders who actually deserved those 4 cups in a row. Most of them they weren't really a dirty team in the sense of mugging their way to the Stanley Cup, but boy, oh boy, some of those guys, if they weren't hooking or holding an opposition player, they would have had trouble staying up on their skates. Morrow, defenseman. Clark Gillies was a fast guy, but he didn't know how to stop. The only way he could stop was hopefully hook a guy into the boards between him and the boards. There were a bunch of guys there, just putsies. But at any rate, they won 4 in a row. And, you know, the Oilers weren't quite ready to go, the real legitimate team of the 80s. And the team that should have been dominant in the early 80s just imploded. That was called the Montreal Canadiens. They were still quite young when the Islanders took the crown from them. Well, one of the disasters for the Canadiens is they had the #1 pick, and they picked Doug Wickenheiser as a loser, as it turns out, in 1980. But you know, the guy who was supposed to be drafted #1 then was a guy called Wayne Gretzky. It had been set up by the former manager. He quit the year before.